Emerson was a transcendentalist writer who was against the society's normal views in their materialistic ways. Emerson escaped from material-obsessed society to live with nature and connect with the beauty of God's creation. Emerson was very religious and believed that God had a direct importance and relationship with nature. He also was an abolitionist and supported the right for people to govern themselves and have a say in their government, which made him against the government and their control over the people. He used wisdom for all of his ideas, just like his lifelong friend Thoreau. Thoreau, according to Wayne, was an abolitionist, meaning he was also against slavery. He was anti-government also. For example, in civil disobedience, Thoreau would not pay the government his taxes because he was against the government's idea of conformity. The government that Thoreau hated did not promote individualism, which is something that he was a big fan of, and also led him not to pay taxes because of these reasons. This also caused him to be against society and the people in it. Thoreau moved into the cabin that was owned by Emerson and spent about 2 years there writing and getting close to nature. Thoreau believed that nature was important, like Emerson, but unlike Emerson, he believed that there was a higher power outside of nature. He was also a believer of hard work to improve society and used his own thoughts and experiences to form his theories. Similarities and differences. Emerson gave his readers abstract ideas that were a little harder to follow compared to Thoreau. Emerson's abstract ideas were harder to understand, and Thoreau shaped his philosophies that made people experience. Thoreau never fulfilled his ideas and was not a very personal person. They also had different marital statuses. Emerson married, and Thoreau never did. They also had different occupations. Thoreau was a teacher, and Emerson a minister. Emerson believed that to be in touch with nature was also to be in touch with God, whereas Thoreau believed that there was a higher power outside of nature, and that God and nature were not as closely related as Emerson thought. Realism writing. The realism period was greatly influenced by the ideas of Emerson and Thoreau and was broken up into 3 divisions: realism, regionalism, and naturalism. Realism is to describe life as it actually is and not how the author wants the world to be. Realism writers use death, survival stories, and diary entries, which are all examples of realism writing because these types of writing tell the truth and don't lie about what really happened. Jack London, Robert E. Lee's letter, and Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River analogy are all examples of realism writing. Regionalism is putting the story in a place and using the language and culture of that area. It makes the location just as much character of the story as the real characters. Regionalism writing includes the dialect, speech, history, morals, and other cultural aspects of a certain area. Mark Twain is an excellent example of regionalist writing because he writes in the dialect of the people and uses expressions that are common there and also involves their culture as part of the story. Naturalism is the final division of the realism period, which includes all possible detail, and compared to other realist writers, they only include the important details. The realism period was greatly affected by Emerson and Thoreau, who impacted the writing styles of Mark Twain, Chief Joseph, Edgar Lee Masters, and Jack London. Emerson and Thoreau compared to later writers. Mark Twain, for example, wrote The Celebrated Jumping Frogs of Calvert County, which deals a lot with nature. An example of the nature is all the lucky animals that Jim Smiley has and tells stories about, such as a horse, a dog, and frog. The main character gets fed up with all the stories that he is being told about Jim Smiley's luck. He ends up leaving old Hang Smiley and his afflicted cow, I muttered good-naturedly, and bidding the old gentleman good day, I departed. This is from Mark Twain's story. This is the character's way of rejecting the stories and the ideas of this man. Emerson was big on rejecting society, and so this would have been Mark Twain's way of adopting Emerson's philosophies and tying them into nature and the dialect of the certain area, using certain animals from where the story takes place. Emerson also believed that hard work and the way to improve society. Mark Twain wrote this story about a man that did not work hard and depended on his luck. So he put his character in the story and was rejecting the luck as his way of supporting Emerson. Emerson and Thoreau compared to later writers such as Chief Joseph. Chief Joseph was a chief of an Indian tribe who were being relocated onto a reservation during the time of government pushing and expanding westward. Chief Joseph states, "My people, some of them have run away to the hills, and have no blanket, no food, no one knows where they are, perhaps freezing to death." This, compared to Emerson and Thoreau, they were anti-government as well, and so is Chief Joseph. And Chief Joseph just wants his people to be safe and have something, but the government has taken everything away from them, their way of life, their civilization, which is something Thoreau and Emerson were against too. So they were connected by their hate, their disliking of the government. Thoreau and Emerson, I think, would have liked to have been Indians in a sort of way. They have the connection of nature which the Indians lived on, and they're kind of related in that way that they enjoy nature and being around nature. The differences between Chief Joseph and Emerson Thoreau is their background. Like, Chief Joseph really understands where his people have been going through, and Emerson and Thoreau don't totally understand everything being taken away from them and having nothing left. Where, as Chief Joseph, it's happening to him in his real life. Abby also feels that Thoreau would understand Chief Joseph's position, and Thoreau explains in his work Civil Disobedience that he was forced into paying a tax that he did not believe in or feel that it applied to him. He took a stand on this issue and ended up spending a small amount of time in jail because of his disobedience, but it did not change his thoughts about the issue. Abby also feels that if Chief Joseph and Thoreau had met, that Thoreau would have told him to take a stand for what he wanted and not let himself be pushed and shoved around by others. And Chief Joseph felt very strongly about protecting and caring of his people and would have been very passionate about taking a stand for what he knew was right. From the reading the two poems in her book, from Spoon River Anthology, Abby was able to compare the writings mostly to Thoreau. It seemed that the writings were mostly about being an individual and finding our own individual happiness, and Thoreau is a big supporter of individualism, even if those around you don't agree with what you are doing. It is important that you do and live for what makes you happy. I also think that you can compare, like, the story of the Hill with their theories on death and how, like, in the end everyone ends up in the same place. No one's better than anyone else. Like they say, the weak of will, the strong of arm, the clown, the boozer, the fighter, all are sleeping on the hill. And they also make death seem not as scary as you want it to be. And they make it seem like, oh, they're just sleeping, when really death is there and you're no longer around. Also, like, again with the thing of everyone ends up together, one died in jail, one fell from a bridge, toiling for children and wife, all are sleeping on the hill. It's also saying, like, no matter how you die, we're all going to end up together, hopefully in a better place, but not exactly sure where. And this is like the mystery that no one has an answer to, and it's like a realistic idea. No one knows where you're going to go. They're not presenting a imaginary place, they're giving you the realism period, and Edgar Lee Masters is using Emerson Thoreau's thought on realism and portraying their theories on death into his story of On the Hill. Emerson and Thoreau compared to later writers such as Jack London. Jack London writes the most like Emerson. Emerson writes a lot about nature, and many of his works include in-depth descriptions of nature, including the one titled My Garden and another titled Nature. Jack London provided background and side information by describing the scenery of the Yukon and the path that this man was traveling on. Examples of description of imagery in To Build a Fire. Day had broke, cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray. There was no sun or hint of sun, though there was not a cloud in the sky. These are all very, very descriptive things, which puts this story also in a naturalism period of writing, where they go into detail about their settings. Another thing about Jack London is his survival story, and like the survival story of To Build a Fire is a lot like Emerson too. It's you're relying on yourself to survive. You're using your own independent strategies and skills to live on your own and survive the elements. But it also brings in nature Jack London's character went against nature and was trying to fight against nature, and you're never going to win against nature. And Emerson knew this, and he believed that you have to work alongside nature and try not to go against nature because it's kind of like going against God in a way.